For anything.
Okay, I'm rolling.
Well, we talk to lots of people that we don't incarcerate, so it's okay.
Yeah. Okay, so
Is she on scene?
are you ready? I know you're ready.
I'm ready. I'm
Yeah.
rolling.
Ready?
All right. So let's start. Officer Harris, could you please introduce yourself and explain what you do?
My name is Reuben Harris, and I'm a police officer for the City of Pullman Police Department. I've been on patrol for over 13 years, so most of what I've done for most of my career is graveyard patrol in a vehicle. So I'm responding to calls, looking for traffic enforcement, looking for anything that I can do proactively to find problems before they happen. At other times, like right now, my assignment is as the College Hill officer. So most of what I do is foot patrol, trying to get to know people, trying to find things that could become problems before they're problems, and be a little more proactive as far as prevention. Other times I've been on bike patrol for an entire summer, things like that.
So, which of the two, in your opinion, do you like more and why? Bike patrol or using a police vehicle?
When I'm doing bicycle patrol, it's an excellent PR tool in terms of people really engage with the bicycle officers more than they do with the officer in a vehicle, obviously. But people are more likely to come up to me, more likely to engage in conversation with me, and they just kind of find it fascinating that I'm working from a bicycle. Compared to on foot, with a bicycle you can cover a lot more territory. You can actually stop cars in a lot of urban situations, but there are limitations.
So for your College Hill beat, would you prefer to have a bicycle? If you had the option, would you prefer to have a bicycle or a car?
And slightly louder this time.
In my College Hill beat, would I prefer a bicycle or a car? For my College Hill beat, I would vastly prefer a bicycle over a vehicle because my whole goal in that position is to get to know people. And I've found in 13 years that when you drive around in a vehicle, that tends to isolate you from the neighborhood rather than engage you with the neighborhood.
Did you just say, sorry, that you can stop a car with your bike? Or
Yes.
how do you do that?
How do you stop a vehicle with a bicycle? You do it very carefully. I've only had one situation where someone essentially tried to run me over. They turned into me, but it just comes down to picking your location well and accelerating up until you can get the driver's attention and tell them to pull over. If they don't, then our radios are a great tool because it really doesn't matter how you drive. The cop saying is you can't outrun Motorola, so I have lots of communication with other people.
Is that when you call a car?
The
If they don't answer to you on a bike?
Right. If they don't respond to me and pull over on a bicycle, then I'm on the radio to get a car in position to stop them. And generally they underestimate my ability to make observations about them before they take off. So usually I'm going to have the license plate, I'm going to have an accurate vehicle description, I might even have a description of the driver. The reason I say that is it's really not that hard to find them if they do flee from me on a bicycle. But on our bicycles we have red and blue lights and then whistles. Between the red and blue lights flashing on the handlebar and the whistle and verbal commands, you just have to get close enough to make that work.
So have you asked the department if they'd allow you to use a bike for your beat? Or would you like to have one, rather?
So, do I have bicycles available for my beat? Yes, I do. So here's the way we're structuring it right now is a lot of weekends we'll have 2 patrol officers on bicycles. I'm on foot, and then we have the officers in cars. So we have a foot team, a bicycle team, and vehicles, and typically I've been in the foot team this fall. So this is a whole nother area that I don't even know if you're interested in, but the equipment that we wear, for example, I have everything set up for what works well on foot and what works well in a vehicle, and that's part of the reason why I don't want to be on a bike right now. Is it would take probably about 30 minutes of rearranging my duty belt to where I could comfortably be on a bicycle.
It almost seems like a bike hinders your duties.
It has the potential to do that. It frees you up to do some things in terms of people don't see and hear you coming the way they do in a vehicle, but you can still be just as fast in a vehicle around College Hill and in an urban environment. The biggest limiting thing with a bicycle is if I have to go upstairs, if I have to go to a third floor apartment or something like that, what do I do with a bicycle? How do I keep that from walking or rolling away? So the handcuffs that we have also work as improvised bike locks pretty quickly.
So in your experience, what do you think of police vehicles in general?
And go.
In my experience, what do I think of police vehicles in general? The vehicles that we've had are very good at some tasks and not so good at others. What I mean by that is most of the time I've been driving a Ford Crown Victoria. The trunk space and the ability to carry a lot of weight and still handle pretty well is very, very good. The problem that we've had in Pullman is they're rear-wheel drive only, and we get a lot of snow. So in the wintertime, it's very limiting. There have been many, many times where even with chains, I've been stuck at the bottom of a hill and I've been running the last quarter mile or half mile uphill to the call on foot through snow because my vehicle won't get there. So we're in the process of getting more all-wheel drive vehicles, but everything I've used so far has been rear-wheel drive only.
I was gonna say, it seems like campus police got a makeup, or like a lift, or what's it called? Makeover in their vehicles.
Yeah, they got two of those.
Those nice
Ford.
SUVs.
Yeah.
So yeah, we have an old style Ford Explorer, the 2010 Explorer, which is a truck-based one. What we've purchased but don't have on the road yet is the car-based SUV that WSU has, and then we have one of the sedans that's the all-wheel drive police interceptor from Ford. But neither the new Interceptors, one SUV, one sedan, I've driven them, but they're not ready for the road yet, and I have not used them on patrol.
If society should shift away from cars because of peak oil, for example, or oil prices go up too much, and could you imagine to use horses and horse sleighs in the wintertime and stuff like that? Could you handle a horse? And
Back to the past.
Uh,
could you handle these things? Would you know how to do it?
Would I know how to handle horses? Absolutely not. I'm not personally. I'm not much of an animal person. If we're on a call and there's a dog involved or a dog that's angry, doesn't know how to react to us, I kind of have an aversion to animals, and there's other officers that will usually step in and are more friendly with the dogs. But so I'm not much of an animal person myself. I spent most of high school on a mountain bike, and I'd be much more comfortable on a bicycle than I would a horse. The horses I've heard from other departments, are very effective in some of the ways that bicycles are, in that people see them as very friendly. And they're also very effective in moving crowds, and the ones that are trained well will step gently, and because of their mass and muscle are able to move crowds and control things that way. I've also heard that they're pretty manpower intense in terms of care and upkeep, just because you can't just turn off the ignition and leave it in a garage. You have to care for it all the time.
What do you think of electrical police vehicles?
What do I think of electric police vehicles? I don't really have enough knowledge about them to really have an opinion. The one of the upsides of the Crown Victoria for us is obviously the infrastructure for fuel and everything is already there. They've been very reliable, even when the coolant system is blown on the highway, and it's something that will shut down the engine and could cause a lot of damage in a short period of time. I've still been able to get back to the station or make it a little further. I don't know a lot about electrical vehicles, and the questions I would want answered are in terms of reliability, range, the ability to carry heavy loads and lots of equipment. And then the other thing that I don't know a lot about but concerns me a little bit as an individual is, even with the current hybrid technology, if there's a major collision, what is going to happen to me involving all that electrical current? So the traditional gasoline-powered vehicles, there are hazards there, but because they've been around so long, they're kind of hazards that I'm familiar with, hazards that I've had experience with before. But if there was a Prius in an intersection that was basically broken in half, I would not be comfortable even approaching it because of the hazards that I don't know.
What was I going to say? So what do you think the police department would do if they no longer had vehicles to use?
What do I think the police department would do if they no longer had vehicles to use? First, I think the city of Pullman my department would be at a big advantage over a lot of other departments because we're very compact geographically, and as opposed to Whitman County, State Patrol, anything like that. My guess is, like, if we had no vehicles tomorrow, we would be using a lot of bicycles. I don't even know how we would transport and control prisoners efficiently. We'd probably be experimenting with, I've seen people with the little trailers that they have their kids on behind a bicycle, and we'd probably be trying to develop a larger version of that. But prisoner transportation and response time would be the two things that would get my attention real quickly.
So have you noticed any emerging trends within the police department in terms of vehicles? And this could be anything.
So I started with sorry, I'll repeat your question. Have I noticed any emerging trends with vehicles in my job and with the police department? Compared to 13 years ago, we're even more vehicle dependent in some ways. Not because of the vehicle itself, but because of all the electronics that are in the vehicle. So 13 years ago, everything we did was handwritten. Now, a lot of the information we get is visual on computers in our cars. We have printers in the glove box. We have scanners in the vehicle that can scan driver's license, registration. So we're more vehicle dependent, not because of transportation, but we're more vehicle dependent because of electricity, power, and powering all of the technology that we're more and more dependent on. Because we're directed right now to do all of our collision reports in a computer program rather than on a triplicate form. We're directed to issue as many citations and infractions out of the electronic printer in the car as we can, rather than written out on a triplicate form. So when I started 13 years ago, everything was handwritten on these forms. Now everything is based on the computer in the car.
So what forms of transportation can you see within the future that the police department would use?
What forms of transportation can I see in the future that the police department would use? The Segways that the University Police Department has, were initially treated as, by everyone, including the officers, as essentially a public relations stunt or even a joke. They're, in some situations, particularly around football games, and I've been told that they're finding them a lot more useful than they thought they would be. I don't. Here's one thing that I would like to see in my own department, but we haven't made it happen in 13 years. And Pullman is a small town, but it's very urban in how it's made up, and it's very congested in some areas of town. And trying to get a traditional vehicle, a Ford Crown Victoria, through traffic to stop someone can be very, very difficult. I would love for us to have motorcycles. I think we could do more things on a bicycle than what we've done. But that's a good question.
How about a flying police car?
Hovercraft.
Now you're reaching the beyond anything. Things like that are difficult for me to even imagine, but the way out into the future, this is just hypothetical, me guessing, grasping at straws at what might be out there in the future based on some of the most current things that I've seen in the military and on TV. But I think there's a potential for us to do some more remote monitoring than physical patrol. So I've seen things that are in development for essentially hovercraft video surveillance of different things, and specifically before a high-risk operation or if there's a large crowd event, that they could be monitoring that from one location and essentially having eyes on it as the officers go into the situation. Because trying to get intelligence in high-risk situations and crowd situations without having a uniform there gets kind of complicated for us sometimes. In terms of transporting officers, the current technology is, helicopters and things like that. I just went to some training where they're heavily used by Los Angeles County, but my impression is that's expensive and uses a lot of energy to do that kind of stuff.
Would you say that police department transportation reacts more to police department needs? So as like cars on the road change, does the police department have to react?
I would say that our expectations in terms of vehicles, this is a little bit, again, this is my opinion, me kind of conjecturing about the thought process of other people, but one of the things that we value a lot and the community values a lot is our ability to respond quickly. So bicycle, foot patrol, that kind of thing, every time that we have officers out on foot and out on a bicycle, we essentially have to have a whole nother force in reserve in traditional vehicles, because the speed to get across town, to get a lot of resources across town to a problem quickly, it's valued highly by our supervisors, by our chief, and by the community. Typically, if there's a medical call of any significance, we're able to get there much faster than the fire department, and we can locate the problem for them. A lot of times our ability to help is limited, but we locate the problem and we can tell the fire department where the problem is and how to best get there. And so the upside of what we have currently is we can get there quickly with the ability to carry medical equipment, rifles, shotguns, all that stuff securely, get there fast, have a way to take a prisoner back, and all of that. So our current platform is geared for responding to calls quickly. The current technology and communications equipment heightens people's expectations that we're going to find them quickly. 13 years ago, relatively few people in Pullman even had cell phones. Now everybody has a cell phone, and when they call 911, they're expecting someone to get to where they are very quickly. So the culture of instant communication has kind of raised the expectations of when they instantly communicate with us that we're instantly going to be physically where they're at. In Pullman, we can do that because we're so small. In Whitman County, it's a whole different situation. If you have a true emergency in Pullman, from the time it's broadcast to the officer arriving, is a lot of times on a weekend night, we have more people out, and I would estimate our response time is about 90 seconds. Other times it might be up to 4 or 4.5 minutes, but it's generally pretty fast. If from one end of Whitman County to the other, if they have an incident on one end and then they're called to the other, it could be 30 or 40 minutes from the time they get the information until they arrive. But with cell phones, with all the technology, people's expectations of us getting there quickly with all the equipment to help them is higher than ever.
Are you out of code?
No, we're good.
What's okay. Here's a little nonsense question. If if society would shift away from cars because of peak oil and so on, probably the government would fund the police so they could have cars a little longer, right? Wouldn't that be a little unfair? Because the criminals don't have cars anymore and you do?
How do you even answer that?
So there's, in terms of what the government's going to have versus citizens might have in the future, here's just an example. I've found that in terms of some technologies, the average citizen is getting technologies and perhaps efficiencies that the police department, we have not had for a long time. For example, the displacement of our engines compared to the power that they put out. You get a Toyota Camry with a V6 and it out-accelerates, out-powers our Crown Victorias with a V8. So you have better fuel economy, more power. Essentially everything's an upside with a Toyota Camry compared to the V8 and the Crown Victoria. The only thing that I have found with the Crown Victoria, to their credit, is it seems to be relatively bulletproof and very reliable. But you know, if someone knew how to drive and really wanted to outrun us, they could physically do it with a V6 and a Toyota over our V8s and our Fords.
Is that frustrating?
No, because it almost never happens. So on the one hand, in the near future, I see the government perhaps putting a priority on obviously keeping us on the road and keeping us with the capabilities that we have, because of the rugged expectations of a police car and trying to keep costs very low. We've been relatively slow to get technology that the average passenger car and the rest of the market already has. All that to say that sometimes you would think that there's a perception among citizens, among friends and relatives, that, oh, you work for the government, you must be on the cutting edge, you must get the best stuff. That's not necessarily true, because cost is one of the top issues in a government agency, and so a lot of times we end up behind the curve in some technology.
So you spoke earlier about the department looking for several years to get bikes. Why is it that the department doesn't have motorbikes?
I don't know. I don't know why we don't have motorcycles. I think it's a great idea. I think it's efficient. It's much more maneuverable. Um, I was in Spokane one time, and a Spokane motorcycle officer, he's driving in traffic. He sees someone on a side street that he wants to contact. He's able to brake, come back on the sidewalk, and cross with pedestrians through the crosswalk. So essentially go from driving in traffic at traffic speed to moving with pedestrians at pedestrian speed and maneuver across sidewalks and do anything that he wants. So I'm not a motorcycle rider. I don't think I would ever become proficient at that. But there's other people in our department who are, and I would love to see that in terms of being able to work in traffic and work safely and reach out and stop those people that you can't get to with a full-size car. Why we don't have that, I think part of it is probably, compared to other parts of the country, there's significant parts of the year where that's not feasible here with the snow and everything. But there's a pretty high dollar value in terms of the training that a motorcycle officer goes through initially. But I don't have a good answer for that. I think it's a great idea. I think the cost is more than justified, but we don't have it.
Now, you mentioned that you're trained in certain vehicle uses a few times. What has the Pullman Police Department trained you in, or have they?
So at the basic academy and repeatedly since then, I get a lot of training on what we call EVOC, or Emergency Vehicle Operations course. So high-speed driving and low-speed driving. Low speed in terms of backing and making corners and things like that. So the physical skills of driving a patrol car. I spent a week going through the physical skills of riding and maneuvering a bicycle. They never did give me any training on foot patrol. I think they assume that I know how to walk and run. But does that answer your question?
No, that's great. I'm out. Does anybody else have any?
Do bicycle riders often try to escape you when you try to stop them, as they do in Berlin, where I come from?
So if I'm in a bicycle and I'm trying to stop someone on a bicycle, was that your question?
Yeah.
So if I'm in a vehicle and I'm trying to stop someone on a bicycle, I've only had one situation where the bicycle rider attempted to get away from me, and I was able to get out of my car and run through the yard that he went through quickly enough that I saw the door he went into. Because of the situation, it didn't meet the requirements for me to go into a private residence to pursue him, but I kept eyes on him, and within a week I met with him and charged him with the appropriate offenses.
Well, I have a friend in Berlin. I stopped. I was caught by the police once when I ran over 2 red lights. And my friend said, "Oh, you have to escape then. You shouldn't stop. Just try to escape." He always does that on a regular basis. Do you think that, in average, we have a chance to get away, or do you think the police would more likely to get us?
This comes back to something. Comes back to something I said earlier, where the average citizen underestimates the ability of the police officer to make observations about somebody, even if they don't catch them. So the radios combined with other officers, combined with a detailed description, the amount of information that an officer transmits when they try to catch somebody and fail versus what a citizen gives us when they see something is night and day. And we generally are able to find and catch the correct person even when they make a short-term attempt to escape. And that's true whether it's on foot or bicycle or anything else. The only limitation to that is being in a university town when someone is dressed all in the typical clothing of the university family.
I want to ask. I
don't know what
Ready?
you want. Yeah.
With more people riding bikes in cities, as in many European cities, but also, for example, in Portland, as I have heard, there are new potentials of problems and aggressions between car drivers and bicycle riders in cities. What does that mean for the police? Because sometimes I think even the legal situation is not really clear and things like that.
So in terms of potential conflicts between vehicle drivers and bicycle riders, in my personal experience, what is frustrating for me as an officer is the bicycle riders who think they're somehow exempt from the vehicle rules. So when they're cutting across lanes, coming into oncoming traffic, they're able to make it physically through smaller spaces and other spaces than a car would, and essentially it's almost like a kid on a playground where you make an instant risk analysis, and if you think you can make it safely, you'll accept the risk. Well, in traffic flow, essentially we're trying to take away all the risk and make it very safe. So when bicycle riders take on that risk, it tends to make the people around them angry, and it makes things very unsafe and unpredictable for the drivers around them. I recently had a gentleman cut through an intersection and come at my patrol car on a bicycle, and he's coming in the oncoming lane. So that misunderstanding of what the rules are for them makes it potentially confusing for the vehicle driver as well as making them angry, but it's potentially very unsafe for the bicycle rider because they don't have thousands of pounds of metal around them to protect them from the collision. There was another aspect that I was going to answer to on that, but I'm trying to remember what that was. Another thing is the bicycle riders, in terms of traffic flow and interacting with vehicles, I see even the more conscientious ones jumping in and out of the role of being a pedestrian to being in vehicle traffic to being a pedestrian again. And that I don't know a lot about the research or the data on this, but I've heard repeatedly that if a bicyclist, especially an adult who's able to move quickly, if they act as a vehicle all of the time, it's much safer for them to be in and out of traffic and being a pedestrian versus in vehicular traffic. So if they're waiting in line, if they're not passing between lanes of traffic, if they're essentially acting as they would being the operator of a vehicle, it's safer for them. It's much more predictable for the other riders and drivers around them, and that's what I attempt to do myself. I don't ride a bicycle at work too much, but I frequently commute to work on a bicycle, and if you take the time to be predictable and behave how a vehicle would, I haven't had any problems.
Do you have that phenomenon in America too, that car drivers are much more aggressive than the same persons as pedestrians? For example, that you get more aggressive in a car? I know they don't in Los Angeles because they're afraid they get shot.
What do you mean by aggressive?
Like in Europe, when we drive a car, we tend to shout at people and get really angry.
Oh,
you know,
do we have...
which we do not do when we
Road
walk.
rage?
Road rage. Yeah. Do you have any? That exists in here too, right?
Yeah, I definitely have road rage.
Why is that?
Well,
Do you have an explanation for that?
do I have an explanation for why people in vehicles get aggressive and angry about situations? I do not have an explanation. One thing that is extremely fascinating to me, but I have no explanation for it, is the culture of drivers in different cities and different communities. I recently went to some training in Seattle, and there were police officers from all over the United States attending this training. Florida, Delaware, New Jersey, areas that are very urban, very congested, and they found the drivers in the Seattle area to be very impatient, very rude, very aggressive, even compared to where they're from. I've heard that from other people. I don't have any explanation for why there's kind of cultural phenomena or behavioral norms among drivers. It's interesting the things that you can read about a driver based on how they drive. So stop me if you don't want to hear about this, but a lot of people who don't think that they can predict violence or don't think that they can understand what someone else is doing or might do next based on their physical behavior do all of those same things driving every day based on how a vehicle's slowing down, how it's approaching an intersection, the braking pattern of another driver, whether they're signaling or not. If you're close enough to see another driver, their pattern of head movement, we make very quick decisions about what that other driver is going to do, what they're paying attention to or not. And that's one of my clearest illustrations I've ever come across to try to communicate to people. When you get a feeling about someone who may become a threat to you, may be angry towards you, may be looking to victimize you, there's a lot of those same small behaviors that you can pick up on very quickly. So there's definitely an expression of attitude through how people drive. Why that is and why it changes from region to region, I have no idea.
So which form of transportation have you noticed in Pullman is the most aggressive?
In Pullman, specifically in little neighborhoods in Pullman, there are small pockets in Pullman where the pedestrians are the most aggressive by far, which is very different than what I've experienced throughout my life in other areas of the Northwest United States. Because most other places, I would say that the vehicle drivers drive as if they own the road, and they consider themselves as being kind of condescendingly polite if they stop for pedestrians. Here in Pullman, with big events and people kind of treating it as kind of Main Street USA and Disneyland, there's neighborhoods in Pullman where the pedestrians believe that they are king of the road, and they will jump out in front of anyone or not double check, not wait to see if the vehicle will stop, but just go. Whether that's a byproduct of the events and having thousands of pedestrians, or a byproduct of intoxication, or both, I don't know, but there are neighborhoods in Pullman where the pedestrians are very aggressive.
Are there any what are the genuine forms of criminal activity that could not exist without the car?
Forms of criminal activity that could not exist without the car. A huge amount of our resources and a very high priority for my department is enforcing DUI laws, and the potential danger that a drunk pedestrian puts onto those around them is very low, just based only on intoxication. If they're aggressive, angry, assaultive, that's totally different. But an impaired pedestrian is essentially only a danger to themselves. An impaired driver is a deadly danger to everyone around them. So without vehicles, that danger and that whole aspect of one of the top priorities of my whole organization would just disappear. That's That's a really interesting question. But how everything is distributed in this company, including illicit drugs, would change dramatically. And I don't even know what that would look like or how they would do it, but the law sees vehicles as being very private. We have to have specific consent or a search warrant to get into a vehicle, and the vehicles are seen as almost an extension of your home in some realms of the law. And because of that expectation of privacy, they're transporting illicit drugs in your own vehicle versus on a bus or in luggage on a bus or something like that is having your own vehicle seems to be highly preferred, to not have the odors out there, have that expectation of privacy and some of the legal protection. In terms of the amount that you could transport and how that would happen, it would change. I don't know what it would look like. I'm pretty sure it would still happen, but it would be different.
Do you think that civilians should have vehicles, or do you have a thought on that?
I think that vehicles make a lot of our experience in this part of the world very democratic. That you don't have to have, relatively speaking, a whole lot of money to be able to go to Seattle and do what you want to do, or even drive to Florida if you wanted to. So the experiences of the whole region, whether it's going to Spokane or Coeur d'Alene for recreation, going to Coeur d'Alene Lake and being able to take me and my 4 kids, being able to get out and get to things on our own schedule, I think the vehicle has democratized a lot of the experience of what we can get out and do. Having said that, compared to the average American, my wife has relatives in Southeast Portland, and when I was 16, getting my driver's license and driving was like goal number 1. And my wife's cousin saw no reason to even have one and put off getting a driver's license until he was 21, and was wanting to go back and forth between where he was in university and Portland. So with all the public transportation in Portland, he was to the point where he did not even see a need for a driver's license. In this region, friends who live in Troy and Deary and rural North Idaho, they're pretty much tied to their vehicle for everything, getting to work, getting groceries. So I think it varies a lot depending on where you're at, how you see a vehicle, but it seems to be almost un-American to not have one.
Okay.